We are going to dive deep into the riveting experiences and profound insights of Dan Gonzalez, a distinguished figure with a remarkable 33-year career within the Los Angeles Police Department. Dan's journey takes a pivotal turn as he promotes to the rank of sergeant, transitioning from a role as a patrol supervisor to a position in internal affairs. It's here that the narrative unfolds, offering a unique perspective on his involvement in cases stemming from the infamous Rampart Scandal. As an associate advocate in internal affairs, Dan found himself in a prosecutorial role, a position not commonly occupied and certainly not for the faint of heart. With courage and conviction, he faced the challenges head-on, delving into the aftermath of a rogue cop in the Rampart Division. The repercussions of this incident cast a dark shadow over the entire Rampart crash unit, and Dan's role in adjudicating the consequences brings to light the complexities of maintaining justice within law enforcement. Join us in this episode as Lieutenant Dan Gonzalez shares first-hand account of navigating the intricate web of challenges posed by the Rampart Scandal. It is a story of resilience, courage, and a commitment to upholding the principles of justice even in the face of adversity. Don't miss out on this compelling journey into the heart of internal affairs, where the untold stories of police work come to life. Welcome to Internal Affairs, a police podcast. Let's go. Welcome back to Internal Affairs, a police podcast. Another special guest, Dan Gonzalez. Thanks for showing up.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Dan and I, you know what? This is actually going to be a pretty, I suppose for me, it's going to be closer to home because you actually were assigned to internal affairs as an associate advocate, putting on these border rights hearing like me. And, it's something that I hold dearly as an assignment. And the reason why I say that is because not many people really know what the role is, and I'm sure you heard this throughout your career, which I'm sure will go down a trip down memory lane, as I say it. But not many people really understand that when you do work internal affairs, we do try our best to look out for all the facts and to ensure that, especially in this particular role, to ensure that if we're really going to fire an officer, it better be very, very righteous. What's your thoughts on that?
I think you're spot on. I think you're right. The issue is with the internal affairs pieces. We want them to uncover all the facts and support whatever we believe the officer broke or did or hurt or whatnot. But we also want to make sure we keep the integrity in the investigation, because the public piece is important, that we hold the officer accountable. But there's the other part when the officer is exonerated. We want to be able to turn back to the public and say, he really did nothing wrong. He really did have the public's best interest, and then sometimes it's not pretty, people want to see how the sausage is made. Yeah. And interactions between people, is not always the best time for in somebody's lives. I mean, the ACLU came out with a thing a while back when they were against body-worn video, is when you call the police, that's probably not your best day if you need the police to come to your house. Yeah, no. So the interaction that's going to happen between you and the officers, and we're just talking about generally if it's a complaint that has to do with actual police work. Right. When that interaction, they feel like they've been slighted or they've been wronged, then we're trying to say that the officer didn't do anything wrong, but it doesn't mean the officer couldn't have done things better. It just means the officer didn't do anything wrong, or he only did just enough that we're going to give him some training, a little discipline. Please don't do this again. But Jane and John Public, we got your back, and we promise that we're going to be a better department because of this. No, totally understandable. Thanks for that. So I am going to ask you about the two core questions like I do with every one of my guests. But before that, look, we were associate advocates. One of our guests, your colleague, Brian Witten, was my boss because he was a lieutenant, and I worked under him. We talked about the gavel. And you're going to really enjoy the episode because it's special, it's tradition, and I see that you have your gavel. And look, what can we say about the gavel? And tell us a little bit about that. Well, it's Brian probably knows more about the tradition than I do. even though I know I got there a little bit before him. But the gavel is something you earn once you do a complete tour, which will be 1 year, and you leave in good standing. They give you this gavel because it represents the judiciousness of the Board of Rights hearing and the administrative appeals that we deal with. And they put down the dates and your name that you were there, especially as a sergeant. And then usually there's a quote that they put on the gavel. What does your quote say?
My quote says, "Give it life."
Oh,
I suppose every time I did opening arguments, or I was talking to Brian or one of my colleagues about, hey, these are my opening arguments, and from there on, from that point forward, I'm just going to give it life. And I kept saying that over and over again. And of course, when I got it, I didn't know that they were going to engrave it in there. But yeah, give it life. Well, what's yours?
well, mine says, wait, it gets better. Because every hearing that we had, as you know, it never turns out how the investigation said it was going to go. Because these investigations, and I don't mean to get too wonky, but these investigations are based on an investigator heads out interviews, the officer, his partner, his supervisor, the public, any witnesses, the suspect, if there's a suspect, and they put it all together, and they all in written form, and then they include some audio, and you listen to the audio, but nothing beats live testimony. So whatever you think that case was from the very beginning, and by the time you get it into the hearing, and you're like, okay, I'm going to start calling my witnesses, I'm going to start calling my evidence, 9 times out of 10, I mean, really 9 times, things go off the rails. There's new evidence pops up. It's almost like Perry Mason, which is not supposed to be. The defense attorney pops up with new witnesses, but you want to get all the facts. So you don't want to just say no more witnesses for the defense. And the defense doesn't have to just do discovery like they do in a criminal case. So it's very common for suddenly an officer or somebody from the public to come up and say, oh, no, that didn't happen. And you don't know why this person did pop up before, and then you have to deal with it. Or you have an officer who maybe said, I wasn't guilty, and they look at all the facts, and suddenly they just say, you know what, screw it, I did it, I'm sorry, you guys please give me some leniency.
Yeah. You know what, it's so true. I've had the experience where here they are testifying, and it's nothing what you prepped for the day or the before. So, okay. The 2 core questions, because you touch on one, which is good. Yeah. But the first one is, look, on a scale of 1 to 10, right? 10 being the highest, please rate the importance of internal affairs in a police department and why.
In a police department, I will give it a 10, but I don't want to say it's more important than, not necessarily more important, because I would say having a human relations, or like we have an employee relations group, that's also a 10. I think having a mental health or a psychological piece to your police department, that's a 10. I think having a leadership component of your department, where you teach leadership and you mentor people, that's a 10. They're all important. Mm-hmm. All the officers are important. The pieces that make us up as a complete organization, we are all very important. But the part about internal affairs, where, and it's almost kind of like it's this name we've used for so many years, and they made movies out of it. It's almost overused. So because basically it's just an entity or a section of you put a group of people in an office, and you say, please look at this complaint, whether it's internal or external, and tell me, did something happen? Did something go wrong? Again, and if it did, then I'll decide what I'm going to do with it. Mm-hmm. So they throw out the facts. They don't tell you what the conclusion is. They just say, here's a bunch of statements, here's some hard evidence, here's some things to look at, here's some video, here's some audio. Take a look at this, and photos, and then it's up to the adjudicator to make the decision.
Right. Did
this officer break, hurt, just hurt themselves, whatever they did.
Right.
What happened? And then they have to figure it out. And then and like I said, if they did figure it out, then what do we do about it?
Mm-hmm. I often, as my guests are coming in and I'm asking this question, sometimes I often think about how it seems as though it's the core of any police function. I mean, I don't know if you could agree with me with the fact that any operations that you do in patrol, or any operations you do from a detective functions, I guess what I'm trying to say is that any and all essential job functions of a law enforcement officer, maybe, or perhaps you did something, right? Or you didn't do something you were supposed to do. And now here comes IA, where we have to, like you said, we have to, hey, tell me if there's something wrong with what this officer did because someone made a complaint, whether it's internal or external.
Correct. And the thing is, I mean, our ultimate customers is the public.
Correct.
So even if it's internal, our ultimate customer is still the public.
Correct.
So we want to make sure that if we're going to serve them, protect and serve, but if we're going to serve them correctly, that we keep our integrity, and then we're able to look at our officers and protect them from themselves, protect them from the public, but be transparent and let the public know, when our people do something wrong, we're taking care of it. And when you think they're doing something wrong and they're not, we have a reasonable explanation. I mean, I would say even like, I don't know, I'm jumping forward, but how much we've evolved is there was a time when we would never release any video of officers doing anything to the public, especially when I first came on. And now we do these critical incidents where we break it down ad nauseum, and then we show the good and bad, like where there's some horrific shootings that way back when officers would have been like almost embarrassed to see themselves doing that they now see it as a training issue, and the public doesn't get so excited about it the way they used to.
Right.
They still get excited, but we get in front of the story, we get in front of the issue, and then especially when it's something where we save somebody's lives, then now the public can see how we're out there doing God's work, and we're actually out there helping to protect them, and we're trying to draw the line between good and evil and make sure that evil doesn't enter into their households, and we're willing to put ourselves in front of them to make sure that they stay safe.
Yeah.
And that's where the videos come very important. And I think with this internal affairs investigative piece, it's evolved to that point.
Yeah, very good. The second question, and you touched on it a little bit, I'll couch it this way. If I'm a young sergeant coming on, I'm in a small department, or even medium size or even large. Here I am, I just made sergeant, and now I'm going to go into internal affairs. What would you tell that young sergeant what his or her job is?
First, the thing is, I would say number one, not just know the law, but know our charter as far as how that protects its officers, know the Police Officer Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. Because those are areas that young officers and even investigators, they don't touch on too much, because we deal more with the Constitution and states' rights as far as dealing with defendants and witnesses. And this is kind of a different realm because we're dealing with employees. So you should know that first before you start diving into how you're going to interview officers, how you're going to collect evidence, and how the process works, because we're talking about a preponderance of the evidence as opposed to reasonable suspicion and probable cause. So I would definitely know that. And second of all, when they get there, just keep your expectations real, because the majority of the complaints they get, there is no resolution. It's people, one person said something to the other, the video doesn't capture it at all, and maybe there is no conclusion. So you just got to keep your expectations real, that your investigations are not going to be solved in 45 minutes. So
do you feel sometimes as though in your experience that some IOs have expectations?
Absolutely. I think the problem is, and I think it's a little mission creep that happens with internal affairs, is they feel like they're responsible for not just, we always say get to the facts of the matter. That's the big term they use, the facts of the matter.
Right.
But there's also how do we protect the department from cops that are doing things that are nefarious, and how do we rid them from the organization?
Right.
And I will tell you, after 33 and a half years, you can't rid them from the organization. They're going to be there, and some of them are just hiding, and they're kind of waiting, and that one decision just hasn't come up in front of them for them to make yet. That's very terrible.
Yeah,
we know, and it can go all the way from deputy chief down to P1.
Right. And
whenever the officer makes that bad decision, we have no control over that.
Right.
So,
and in your experience, do those bad decisions happen a lot, or they're very minimal?
I would say very, very minimal, especially ones that are specific where the officer made a conscious decision that I'm going to do an act that I know if I ever get found out about, I'm not going to be able to do this job anymore. Those are very, very rare. And you think about it, the cases that we had, 50 cases a year, 30 to 50 cases a year. out of, well, back in the day, I say back in the day because it was only 10 years ago, but 10,000 of us.
Yes.
So you think about 50 cases where we're looking at firing people out of 10,000 of us. If you did the percentages, pretty low.
0.00001%.
Yes.
And Dan, you know what? You do have a lot of experience. You told me, wow, north of 33 years.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I also got to ask you, have you ever wondered throughout your career why there's a stigma against internal affairs? Why are we called like the rat squad or the dark side? I'm sure you've heard cop haters.
Well, I'll tell you, I think some of it is how we treated each other. What I learned from, when I came on in April 23rd of 1990, when you got out is trust the sergeant, but if it goes internal affairs, you're going to be in big trouble, and you got to watch out for those guys because they're trying to make the names for themselves. They're trying to get promoted, and they're out to get you. So if you saw a sergeant and he had white paper, that meant he was going to write up whatever the citizen had to say, and you're good to go. And you might end up with a comment card, and it was more like a kind of what we now do, the mediation we do with the officers.
Right.
It was more that. And then he broke out the yellow pad. That meant 181 and stand by, because they did not take a 181 unless the sergeant was fairly sure that you probably did it.
Right, and that's that's a form.
That's a form,
an LAPD form number that everybody. And so basically, it's culture.
Yes, culture. And and what I was going to say with my training officers, they said there was a time back in the 60s when you get called down to internal affairs over at the old PAB, Parker Administration Building, and they have you sit there for 6-7 hours and then send you away. Like, oh, we don't need you today. And they bring you back. Oh, we're going to interview you today. Oh, not feeling like it. And then send you away. And they bring you in and they tell you were there for one thing, and then turn around and say, no, actually, it wasn't because of the traffic stop. It's going to be because of the DUI arrest you made. And they show you new paperwork, and you didn't have any representation, and you had no idea what the heck just happened. And you're given statements, and it was just completely, it was a shit show.
So it's the treatment that's the penalty, not the penalty in it itself.
We are not warm and fuzzy. I mean, and I'll tell you that I run a Reddit account, LAPD Reddit, and I see people asking questions about coming on the job, and they can't wait, and they think that it's all unicorns and rainbows, and we're all hugging each other and high-fiving each other, just like the movies. I mean, maybe they watched SWAT or End of Watch too many times,
right? But
they don't see the other side where there's, and maybe it's a group think or mission creep in our organization where there's some people, it's in their nature, if they're interviewing somebody, that if I have to interview you, that means you did it.
Yeah. No, totally, man. You know what? It makes more sense as the more guests that I get, especially ones that we share the same expertise, if you will, or the experiences, I should say. It just goes to show you that, man, we were just totally rude, totally disrespectful, condescending the way we treated you because we felt that I think you did something wrong.
Correct.
So today, I'm not going to interview you. Come tomorrow. And I suppose those field training officers, as the decades and decades have gone by, you couldn't help but to tell the newer generation, you know what, watch out for them because they're out to get you.
Yeah, and although I could say, I think here we are 30 years later, and there are a lot of officers, especially gang officers, would say, I would rather let it go to internal affairs.
Yes.
Than have the patrol sergeant with 4 years on. Then interview it. This type of function, man, it requires a lot of experience, and I couldn't agree with you more. Okay, trip down memory lane. 33 and a half years. You're retiring soon, I would imagine. I'd like to retire in the next 12 months. By 2025, this time next year, I'd like to be on my boat and just sail
away.
That's right. Or turn the motor on and going down the coast.
You came on in 1990, like you said. You know what? I got to ask you because I remember when I was a probationer, I always asked my training officer, sir, ma'am, where were you in the riots, in the 92 riots? Which, by the way, a lot of people listening are probably not going to remember. Well, some will, depending on the audience, but the 1992 riots, man, what was that all about? Where were you?
Where was I? I was working middays. I want to say it was I was in West LA middays. I believe we were on a radio call in Brentwood, and they came out of the radio that
The decision came out.
that some of the officers were found not guilty, and a couple officers were found guilty on misdemeanor charges. And we thought in our minds, finally, this is put to rest. It is done.
Right.
They're over.
And then what happened?
We went back to the station to go end of watch, and there's a little TV above where the food snack thing is, and you see all the people in the middle of the street over at Florence and Normandy, and they're throwing rocks and bottles. And then I turned on to attack frequency that they're on, and you can hear them yelling, "We need help! Rocks and bottles!" And we checked in. My partner and I checked in with the watch commander and said, "Are we being held over?" And he said, "No, go home." So we went home.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
and then we watch more on the news, and then I get a call at 6 a.m. Get your butts in here.
I was going to say, I get this feeling you came back.
The whole place is on fire. Yeah. And we went down there, and I watched a Fedco burn down. I watched the a Music Plus get totally looted, and Circus City get totally looted, and we spent a lot of time over in Southwest and Wilshire Division.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Field Training Officer, which is a Police Officer 3 in October of 1994.
Yep.
In my understanding, was it there an assignment that you worked a crash?
Yeah, so I made training officer in 1994, which is back then was easy. Today it's almost impossible. I mean, there's so much competition. Mm-hmm. Back then there was 9 openings and 12 applicants. So really, I got lucky. So
well,
yeah. So I mean, it's just I showed up, I breathed, and then I knew my core values, and I got the spot.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, and shudder to interject. Is crime reduction against street hoodlums?
Yes.
Yeah, crash.
Right. Yeah.
And we'll talk about that because that's going to be kind of important when we get into a little bit more of our conversation. Sergeant at April of 2002. So let's see. You were a good functioning, stellar officer until you made sergeant in April of 2002. That's like 8-9 years.
8-9 years, yeah. But I did some things in between. I detective trainee for a year.
Okay.
I did a 3-month loan, 3-month loan to dope, a 3-month loan to Vice. I transferred to Hollywood Division. So and I think there's pretty much those kind of things. I just did a few of those things, and then I went back to a gang unit.
Okay.
So when they switched from crash to gangs, the sergeant who was going to be in charge when I was in Hollywood said, "We're going to reconfigure. Can you come over with the gang unit?" And then I worked the gang unit, and when they first gang unit in Hollywood after they renamed it from crash, and then I made sergeant from there. So
okay. And in April 2002, we made sergeant, and we went code 6 at scene at internal affairs.
Yes. So I've completed my loan, my 2-month loan, and next thing I know, Ed Data Show came over. He was a sergeant too up there, and he said, "Hey, would you like a rocker?" And I thought I was going to do a 2-month loan and go back to patrol. I really thought there was no way they were going to keep me there, and I just did one case, and he goes, "Hey, looks pretty good to me," and then here's your stripes, and then all of a sudden I got 9 cases, and I had to learn fast because you going up against Jody Gonda and
all these hotshot attorneys, really good attorneys, defense attorneys, and we'll touch on that because I know that you made lieutenant in 2013. Man, you were a sergeant for quite some time, man. And you know what? I always tell people, sergeant is the best job, not just in our organization, in any department.
Yeah,
because it's almost the way I see it is, it's almost like you do learn some expertise, or you learn something you're very savvy with, and guess what? They'll leave you alone. They will leave you alone. Like if you're the taser expert, you're the one that's doing all the research. You're the one that's doing all the training. You're the one that's doing all this everything.
Absolutely.
And if you just say, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore," whoa, you can't leave because the lieutenant's not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so sergeants is it's a spot on. Really good assignment. What's your take on that?
I agree. If you're a good sergeant and you work hard and just show up to work, they will grab you, and people will not let you go.
They won't.
You can't. They won't. And it's the toughest. Lieutenants get moved. I mean, there's only 180 to 210 lieutenants at any given time.
Right.
But the sergeant level is just so critical because you're the ones that touch the officers, and you're the ones that that actually make the things happen.
Yeah. You're the distributor. You're there between the lieutenant, command staff, and the officers.
Correct.
Absolutely. You made lieutenant in 2013, and you're there as a lieutenant now.
Yeah.
Okay. So help me with building this foundation, because you and I have had some conversations about the Rampart Scandal.
Correct.
Okay. the Rampart Scandal occurred in the mid 90s, and internal affairs played a major role in this. All because there was one particular individual who basically, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at some point, basically he was a drug dealer just checking out cocaine from the evidence property in downtown, and going out there doing his thing and returning it back with baking soda or powdered sugar, whatever it was. And we were able to find out, and it became a huge scandal. I know this because I was in the academy when my instructor came in and said, this is what happened. And that was like, I want to say August or maybe September of 1998. And you ended up as an advocate in internal affairs in 2003. So you kind of caught the post scandal and kind of help me, not me, but help us paint this picture, what your role was, and how was IA, and how was, what is it that you did, and if you were involved in this scandal with all these cases. And I'll leave the floor up to you.
Oh, just to, because I mean, I'm sure that I know they've written books about it, and what some of the stuff I've heard in the books are just absolutely not true. First of all, this was not an organized group of officers that said one day, we're going to go out and start setting people up and stealing cocaine. It was not organized whatsoever. The other issue is the incidents that they were dealing with at that, when the internal affairs found out about it, these were cases 6 and 7 years old that they were trying to piece back together. So, and where Ray Perez would say, this guy did something, this officer set this person up, and they would push the report aside and go look at it, and it would be up to the investigators to try and figure it out. And sometimes they were able to figure it out, because the issue was the officers would put information in the report that didn't make much sense, and then when they pulled it apart, they were like, okay, there's no way you knew that unless you actually violated this person's rights.
Okay.
But those were rare. Those were so rare. A lot of it was more of like a procedural issue. A lot of times weren't followed. And this was officers I'm talking about. They wanted to send to a board of rights and got like 5 days. So like you brought somebody to the station, you didn't present to the watch commander right away, and your log didn't match your check-in on the when you checked them in, when you put them down on the bench, that time didn't match your DFAR, which is your daily field activity report.
Right.
So
the log that you just
right,
every day.
So that would be an accurate log, and that would be a 5-day suspension.
But the department just felt like, oh my God, this is...
There was so much...
They're
lying, which a lot of it was, I would say it would be sloppy in today's standard, but back then it was, is it 4:15 or is it 4:20? Right? Or is, and then, what, actually, I forgot what time it was. I'll write down 4:10. Right. So a lot of it was simply those types of actions. And then the more nefarious ones were the officers, no way did they see the person drop the dope. And when they got the witnesses together, those ones are problematic. When you find a gang member and he's got Winchester hollow points inside the gun that you pulled off of him. Okay, which is our duty rounds. You've arrested a lot of gang members. I haven't seen too many with Winchester hollow points. I'd be impressed if they did, but we all know that there's a high likelihood that some officer put those in there, right? And then and those mistakes were made, and that's kind of probably more of a cultural thing than it is organized, systematic
criminal
activity. Right, exactly. And those are the things. And it's unfortunate because we put those officers on trial. And some of those officers who went on trial were for theft from the city because they had their greenies, right? And they
the overtime slips.
And the sergeant would take the overtime slips and then put them underneath his blotter and say, okay, you guys go ahead, go to the bar, go drink and have some fun. And if anything happens, I will turn in these overtimes. Oh, I'm sorry, these overtime slips will be a deduction in your time, that extra time on the books.
Right.
Right.
So if something goes wrong, you were not on duty.
Yes.
Got it.
Now, I personally I've heard of that. I've never seen it. Because I was always curious what would really happen. Who's going to run back to the station, grab those out of the blotter, and throw them in the overtime slip, right? So to make sure, hey, they're all off duty. So who would do that? But apparently it did happen. That was a practice in the Rampart thing sometimes, and that was reported. They did find some greenies, but they never actually enacted on it, but that was part of their trial.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, come on. I mean, and that's why some of those officers, they're all found out guilty. So, and then we ended up paying out a whole bunch of money. And with that poor sergeant, we sent him home for 10 years. After a lot of us internal affairs said, that sergeant didn't do anything wrong. He could have done things better, but he didn't do anything wrong. And they paid him out a handsome sum of money.
Do you recall, here you are as an advocate, did you get like brief, like, hey, you got all these cases coming with you? Or did you help out with these, were they trying to settle? Was it a whole bunch of cases or, kind of?
We were trying to settle them. And that was the issue. We're trying to settle them. A lot of them were trying to settle because it was policy and procedure issues. Okay. And we were able to settle a lot of them. And but the problem is, like, one of the problems issues we had was they had that trial going on with, I think, 5 or 6 officers. Okay. That was just kind of holding us at bay. And because you can't put on a board if you've got a criminal trial going.
Correct.
So that held us at bay for a long time, where we were like, we're ready to settle this. And then we're found out guilty. Then we're like, okay, well, now we're really done.
One thing I'm curious about, I know it was 5 or 6 officers, but in actual Rampart crash, how many officers were actually assigned?
God, that is a good question.
It's got to be, I mean, I would imagine it's got to be 15 to 20 or probably more. Yeah, and it just so happens that Ray Perez says, hey, it wasn't just me, right? It was. But
it wasn't all, if there was that many, I guarantee it wasn't all of them.
Correct.
Because the one old partner of mine, Kulan Patel, nothing, 0 wrong. That guy's integrity is in check. He never would have taken place of anything anywhere near what was alleged in that. So I would tell you, there were other officers in that unit that were exactly like him. So to paint them all with that broad brush was completely unfair to those officers. And like I said, a lot of them, they got paid handsomely because of some mistakes.
Any case that stands out that you'd like to share?
A specific case that stands out. That is a good question. I would say,
not just that. I mean, you were an advocate for 4 years, like I was. Is there one that really just kind of left you just in awe, or pretty surprised, or that you can share with us?
I think one was, and it was a lesson learned as far as what we consider either lying or officers trying to take advantage of the system. There was an officer who was light duty, and he was being accused of doing actions that were not consistent with him being light duty, which means, and I'm light duty, I'm sorry, he was IOD.
Okay, so he had a workers' comp claim.
Yes.
And he wasn't working.
Correct.
Getting paid.
Correct.
At home, and he suffered from some injury.
Yeah, a knee injury.
So he had a knee injury.
Correct.
Okay.
And then he ends up going to I think a police games or something like that, and he's on a motorcycle doing this huge jump with this big brace, and Charlie Beck is also there.
Okay,
right. And this is before, I think Charlie wasn't chief back then.
Right.
So they send him to a board.
Wow.
Right. And from what I recall, his doctor went to the board and said, yeah, he violated it, but he wasn't supposed to do that. He can't be going back to work. That's fresh surgery. So I looked at that and I thought, what the hell did we just put this board on for? Did we ask the cop correctly? He probably would have said, yeah, I violated my doctor's orders. I'm sorry. But he's still saying I can't come back to work because my knee is still trashed and I've got, pins and whatever in there. And we sent that guy to a board. Not guilty, by the way. Yeah,
right, but what did we send the board for?
That's kind of one that stood out, that it was early on when I was up there and I realized not every case is going to be coming up to this Board of Rights hearing is going to be the case. It's not, they're not all eligible for not everybody's going to get fired.
Right.
It looks like it when you first see it. If I'm touching on that, I wanted to kind of bring up something. There's always a misnomer about Bratton, because we used to have to meet with Bratton on Tuesdays, what they call for signings. And early on, in some cases, the guys were getting like 40 days and 55 days and 30 days. And the max you can get before you go to a board is 22 days. And Bratton told us, he said, I don't understand what the difference between 45 days and 22 days are. It means the same. He's like, the cop's not going to learn anything different. He's like, I would rather see, instead of doing all these boards, so they're what, $8,000 a day at least?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we just send people to a board that you think are going to get fired? They need to get fired. Bring me a case. If you say a Board of Rights, then that means this guy has done something so heinous, he needs to be terminated.
Right.
If you want to give a guy 30 days, just give him another 22. And then if you got a guy coming up with 3 sets of 22-day suspensions, then we'll have a conversation and we'll bring it. So that got spun up, and unfortunately, the messaging that went out was, if you go to a Board of Rights, you're getting fired. Right? You remember that? And it wasn't that he was, I want everybody to go, I want the whole department to go to Board of Rights. He's just stop trying to give the guy 30 days. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
The cop, 8 more days is not going to teach the cop not to do something wrong again.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the way it works. And the other thing about that is that Brian also he'd get called by captains who thought the officer was going to get fired or get fired. And you get a phone call. What happened? And he would send it back down to the advocate's office. Why didn't this cop get fired? So we would have a deputy chief call the board members and say, what happened to the board? We presented the same evidence, everything else. The first captain said fired. The bureau said fired. Review and evaluation said fired. The chief said fired. We gave you all the facts, and you said, nah, not feeling it.
Just give him suspension.
Right. So that got morphed into, if you don't fire this cop, you're going to get a phone call from a deputy chief or an assistant chief, maybe a deputy chief, like, what's wrong with you? And it was more of, what the hell happened? Like, what did we get wrong about it? Right? What did we get wrong?
Lessons learned.
Lessons learned. Now, I will tell you, my experience, though, is it's hard to look at an officer doing something on duty with his best heart, even though he made a huge mistake, and say, especially if his kids are there and his wife's there, I'm asking for a second chance. And you're like, no. If his integrity's in check, it's hard not to give the guy a second chance.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's if your integrity's in check, you can pretty much get away with quite a bit. But I say integrity, that means not just lying and stealing. That means not extra use of force. Yep. Right. Yeah.
And the majority of cases, I know you can agree with this. I mean, the best bang for your buck is a false statement. It's a misleading statement. Look, if we're going to do this hearing and spend all this time and effort and money, it better be serious.
It better be, and a substantive lie.
It better be a good lie. And
the lie can't be, you know what, I called in sick, I wasn't feeling well, you came to the door, I'm having a party at my house. And like, well, I am sick, but my girlfriend, my kid's having a party. But I'm still sick.
Yes.
Okay, that's not a lie.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know this just for this past year, I've been teaching at Savage Training Group, and a lot of what I teach, we actually are fortunate to have a false, misleading definition, an actual policy. You'd be surprised. There's agencies, they don't even have what to go by. And perhaps you can agree with me on this, is that we know preponderance, the standard of proof is preponderance. It's 51%. Totally get that. To your point, but this example we just used about, hey, I'm calling in sick. And, look, I know from my experience, that better be, these board members crank that up to like 80.
Oh yeah, they will
90%, because if you're going to be accusing someone of lying,
they're not going to take 51%, because you're going to take someone's livelihood, their career, that's what feeds their children.
Yes.
That's what's going to set them up for the rest of their life so they can retire, and you're going to yank it all out from underneath them.
Yes.
For a lie. It's got to be a damn good lie. I mean, a good dirty lie. It can't be the I'm trying to protect myself, or I don't want to say protect myself, but I'm trying to skew the facts more in my direction.
Correct.
I mean, and we could take care of those. That would be misleading.
Correct.
And we don't fire for misleading.
No. Yeah.
Right.
Or you know what? Depending on the circumstances, you're right. There's always an inaccuracy.
Inaccuracy.
Right. We soften the blow, and we'll find them guilty for running an inaccurate statement in a log,
right,
or giving an inaccurate statement during an official investigation. I totally get that. What surprises me the most about this process is that, and you can attest to this, is the emotional component, and no one really understands what an officer goes through when they're facing the worst. I mean, they're about to lose it all. Can you kind of touch on that? Because here's the deal: we talk about mental wellness, and I've said this on prior episodes. But when we talk about mental wellness, we're talking about someone who's experienced a traumatic event, right? An OIS, a loss of life. But no one really talks about the discipline system. What's your thoughts on that?
One is, I think the system itself is discipline. Putting somebody on the desk and stalling their career for a year to a year and a half so they can go to the Board of Rights and then be found not guilty, that can cause some PTSD because there's a lot of stress, especially if there's a criminal case on top of it and the whole thing goes away. Because I've never seen an officer walk away and say, "Oh, I beat that." I've seen officers walk away and say, that was one of the most traumatizing times of my life. I think the other part is when you do have to make that final decision, especially during the board when they're saying, "Okay, you're terminated." It's interesting to see the captains that are either angry at the officers, and this is the part I didn't like. They say you're terminated, and then they'd still dress down the officer. Like, you are not worthy of that badge. You don't deserve to wear that badge. You're an embarrassment to the department, and we are better off without you. All those facts may be true. They may all be true because I've seen some cops do some pretty outrageous things that I'm kind of like, what are you doing here? You don't want to be here anymore.
Right.
But then I've seen officers or command staff when they've had to terminate somebody with tears in their eyes and say, when you didn't go to a 911 call again and you decided to go do something, go shopping, and you never showed up and somebody almost got hurt. And this is the third time and you don't want to be here. But I'm more upset that it's your family that you just let down. And, talk about the hierarchy of awareness, right? The very tippy top of that leader, they recognize that when you're your employee, it's not just your employee, but you're in charge of the management of their family and the community. And we have actually command staff that look at that way, that we're not just taking away from somebody, we're not just losing a bad apple or lopping off a wart. We're tearing apart somebody's life, and it's got to be worth it. That's why that 51% will never stand muster. They can't. It's the most terrible thing in the world. And that beautiful building that we used to work in, that Bradbury building, nobody ever jumped from that 5th story. So for folks, that it's this Bradbury building, it's shaped as an oval in the inside, and there's an open atrium, and it's 5 stories down. And the fact that we'd have people grab the edge, but there are some people that are so emotional and so sad to watch it leave, to have to leave the department, that you could see in their eyes that they might do something bad to themselves.
No, totally.
Because, just one last thing.
Yeah, no, please.
Because the thing is, when you get fired, some people think you just get to keep your pension. And this is for, hopefully, if any LAPD officers are watching, the young ones especially, if you get fired and you have 20 years on, you're vested. You get to keep your pension. But you revert back to tier 3, which is a lower percentage. Even if you're at tier 5 or tier 6, they will put you back at tier 3. I don't know how we agreed to this, but that's just the facts. And if you're under the age of 50 and you have 20 years on and you get fired, not only will you revert back to tier 3, but you still cannot collect your money until you're 50 years of age.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's having 20 years on is not the greatest thing. Now, if you have less than 20, they will give you back all of your contributions without interest, and you'll get your sick time and your vacation time. So you get a good chunk of money, but it's still not the same as saying I've got my pension. And there's plenty of officers out there that I know that are not with the department anymore that wish that they could just have stretched it out a few more years. But it's unfortunate.
Very, very good. And before we move on, you touched on it just a little bit ago about I was under the belief that if you do something on duty and you're facing this Board of Rights hearing, the department's pretty flexible. They're pretty lenient.
Overall, you're right. As long as your integrity is in check, and especially now with civilians on the boards nowadays.
Mistake of heart, mistake of mind.
Yes. If your integrity is in check and you didn't lie and you didn't overly use force on somebody, they will, and you promise you can get better from it and learn from it. Yes, they were very lenient. They want to help you. And I think even today's climate, we're emptying out jails. We want people to, we want people to learn from, from their mistakes, and stop the recidivism, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I say that from the standpoint that there is a lot of leniency in terms of doing your job functions, as opposed to when the scope gets really, really narrow when you're at home or off duty.
Correct.
You do stuff that just It could be criminal in nature. It could be in, some conduct that's just completely a negative reflection on yourself in the department. That scope, you will be more scrutinized, and there's not much leniency.
I agree. I think the problem is your off-duty behavior. It's you can't let your emotions get the best of you, and whatever your moral weaknesses are, you can't let that get the best of you. I mean, I'll take it even from like driving into work, and you decide, that toll road. What if I just took my license plates off my car, right? Yeah, and that will
Not just once.
No,
A couple of times.
50, 60 times.
Oh, of course.
Right. Yeah. So, but those are things, that kind of off-duty behavior. And by the way, in that particular case, toll road didn't really care about the money. They really didn't care.
Right.
So we can't even prove a theft.
Correct.
As far as the department is concerned.
Correct.
But your moral compass has been lost.
Yes.
And I would say, and like I do on Reddit quite often, if you have an issue with your moral compass and you're on the police department right now, you might think about other jobs. I suggest diesel mechanic, but find something else that you're not going to have to worry about having to leave this department with a criminal charge over your head. Because this DA right now is looking and finding cases to put on officers that aren't even fireable cases. That we have an officer, we have a sergeant who was involved in a TC, and they filed charges on her for reckless driving. So this job it's not all unicorns and rainbows, and there's plenty of, and a lot of officers that have been terminated. I will tell you, they go on to make way more money. Are they as happy with their careers?
Probably
I don't know.
not. Yeah,
probably not.
that's
But
true.
this is not. I don't know if I would do this again.
Yeah, no.
Although my training officer didn't your training officer tell you that?
Yeah.
Oh, kid, I can't imagine doing this again for another 30 years. You idiot! What are you doing?
Yeah, as noble and as a great profession that it is nowadays, I got to echo all that. I teach at a Savage training group, and on day 2, when we start talking about officer-involved shooting investigations, I stand up in front of the crowd and I say, listen, you're one incident away from getting criminal filed on.
Yes. Yeah.
You and I both know an OIS 10 years ago is not an OIS today.
Right. Right.
And
I mean,
you could be doing everything by the book.
And you put your finger on the trigger to make sure the trigger's still there, and you get shot in the face, and you're still going to get written up because you put your finger on the trigger before your sights were aligned on the target and you're prepared to shoot, or ready to shoot.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, by the way, who was your first training officer?
It was out in Foothill Division, and it was a guy by the name of John Lonergan. I'll never forget. I've had a couple, and they were just, hierarchy. I just looked up to him, and they taught me so much.
Isn't it fascinating? Because when you ask people that, and I can't remember, but you don't remember the serial number? Or no?
Oh yeah, I mean we're talking like the 2 7s, the 2 6s.
Oh, geez, I know 2 7 serial number, but it's fascinating because for people who become training officers, and this was told me by my training officer, when you become a training officer, it's the most important part of patrol because you're going to shape and mold that person's career.
Yes,
and that first day is a pain in the ass because the cop is not going to know anything, and you as the training officer are going to have to train that cop. But that first day, you got to let it go and just make sure that you make it the best day they can possibly have. It might be your worst day, but you can't come in tired and you just slam the door when you left, and you don't want to be there because you got to make it the best day for them. I didn't have the best day, so I don't want to tell you about that. My first.
Well, you know what? I'll.
Everybody remembers, right?
No, of course.
Yeah. Now, who's your third training officer?
I had my shirt. Yeah, no, there's some that I just like. We can definitely. Everything that good comes with the bad.
Right.
That's for sure. And it probationary period is, to me, it's something like, you know what, I'm not going to do what he, when I'm a P2 and I'm finally a police officer, I'm not going to treat people the way he or she treated me.
So you would also say, imagine body worn video on your first training officer.
Oh gosh.
How would that have worked out?
Probably not good.
Oh.
A whole bunch of IAs probably for that matter.
Probably, yeah. But now you can't say that anymore, right? So I say that because if you have to say that about your training officers back then, because I'll say from like one of my training officers for sure, body worn video on us all day long, no problem. But if you have to think that if that was the case now, really, were we treating the public the best that we could have treated them back then?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So because we should have all been able to wear body worn video back then.
Oh no, absolutely. Yeah. No, I totally get your point. So, Hey, thanks for all that. So now we're in the segment where, I know you have another story because this is where we do best and worst. But
Okay.
I used to do best and worst because I don't want to leave on a worst note. So I'm going to ask you first.
Worst
your
first?
worst incident or something that happened in your career that you can share with us.
My worst one was my P1 was accidentally shot, not by me, by another officer. When we were looking for kids playing ding dong ditch, and we had spread out across this apartment building, and some of the officers had their guns out. We didn't. Some officers with me didn't, but some of the officers that were searching for these kids at 10 o'clock at night in a well-lit apartment building did have their gun out. And when I opened up one of those fire doors, it splits a hallway in half. I opened it, and my P1 was right next to me, and there's an officer on the other side with a firearm, and his firearm out, and he pulled the trigger and hit the P1 in the gut.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's
He lived, and he's fine.
You were a field training officer, and that was your probationer.
You don't ever want to see your probationer get hurt. Even if it wasn't necessarily all of your fault, still take responsibility. He became a training officer. He's a great guy. I think he's still on the job. But that was probably the worst day of my life. My classmate, Tina Kerbrat, she was killed in line of duty. So I was reliving that because I was in Foothill when that happened, and she was in North Hollywood. So so that was like, and we only had 5 months out of the academy.
Oh man.
Yeah. So that was the absolute worst day.
Yeah, totally. Okay, the best, funny, best, something rewarding, achievement, or whatever you can think of that we can leave on a good note.
My achievement is going to be hopefully 12 months ago now when I retire, because I will be leaving healthy. I'll be leaving with a few dollars in the bank, which is kind of nice. I'll be looking back on my career that I had a pretty decent career as far as I'm concerned. I did some of the things I didn't want to do. I did, and some things I never thought in a million years I would do. I did, like this.
The gavel.
Yeah, I had never thought I'd work there. And I met some amazing people, and I had some great experiences. And I feel like I could have another 30 years on the back end, like I had on the front end.
Yeah.
And I think I just remember in the academy, somebody saying, a successful career is being able to have that poster at the end. So how many don't make it?
Yeah, no.
Don't make it. They're not, and it's luck, right? It's a lot of it's luck.
Yeah.
And I want to be that healthy on the back end. I feel like I'm going to be. So, but so many of them aren't. So, hopefully everybody's taking care of themselves. I think we have a healthier department now as far as really health, taking care of ourselves, drinking, smoking, eating Tommy's, an Okie dog every other day, right? I don't think we do that.
Well, you worked at Foothill, right? Norms.
We ate Norms, yeah.
The only
Norms.
thing that was open.
Yeah, it was open. We'd go over there.
Steak and eggs, man.
Yeah, and the biscuits and gravy, and just clog the arteries. Yeah. But now there's gyms in every station. I feel like every other cop's an MMA fighter or a freaking bodybuilder or something like that, which is great.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I
would love to be a training officer today.
Yeah. No, because your P1s.
Go handle it.
I was at the academy the other day, and they were on push-up number 60, and everybody was there. And I'm thinking, well, okay, something's in the water. It's going well.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, I can't complain. So, and I got to meet guys like you.
Yes.
And you're on your retirement, and I want you to be super successful. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another 30 years on the other end of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay. Any parting words? Anything that you would like to tell whoever's listening or watching? We know it's going to be a young officer, someone who's in our department that's going to promote, someone who's a sergeant that's promoting to lieutenant, maybe even lieutenant's going to promote the command staff. You're very familiar with the adjudication process and the whole nine. Any advice you can give anybody as you reflect on your 33 and a half years of LAPD?
Well, I would say, because I came on right before Rodney King and then left and lived through all that. I watched the department when I came on, training officers telling me, oh my God, kid, this is the worst time. We can't use the baton anymore. We can't use the chokehold anymore. Everybody's out to get you. They'll throw you in jail if you're doing police work. And I don't know how you're going to make this another 30 years. And if I were you, I'd rethink your career. So, and I feel here we are 33 years later, and the same story, but we still got officers coming on.
Yes.
And officers still going to jail. But we had officers going to jail back then because they were doing things like robbing liquor stores and setting up murder for hires and getting involved with gang members and
And
stuff like
much,
that.
much more.
And all those things happened back then. And we just didn't have tabloids and YouTubes and books about it. So if you're in the profession, stay in, work hard. Good things will come to you. Keep your expectations real. If one door closes, look for another open door, and you know that very well. You can't and be true to yourself and be true to your officers, and just recognize we are an organization, and we're not your family. And the number one thing is the only person that will remember you giving up a day off to work, a holiday to work, giving up your kid's football game to work is your family. That captain, sergeant, detective, training officer, when you change that move that day, and it's important for the family, they're going to be long dead and gone. But your adult child will remember when you missed that important football game. Yeah. So don't let the department ever push you into giving up your family over them, right?
Great piece of advice, man. I definitely 1,000% echo all that. Dan, thank you so much for showing up, and you owe me a trip on the boat.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah, we're going to do that for sure.
Yeah.
And for everyone who's listening, watching, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, definitely share. And of course, let's not forget about our sponsorships, Titan Group. Thank you for developing this relationship. If you need any type of private investigative services, get a hold of the Titan Group. The link is on the channel. And obviously, as a Savage Training Group instructor, any type of training that you need, please, again, the link is on the YouTube channel for Savage Training Group. And on that note, like I always say, please be safe out there, and don't forget to go Code 6.